You are here today, not by accident, but by divine design. Every step you've taken, every challenge you've faced, and every victory you've experienced has been part of a larger plan. A plan that was set long before you even realized it. Let me remind you of something profound. God, the creator of the universe, knows what's next for you. The future you're worried about, He's already there. The challenges that seem insurmountable, He's already made a way. The dreams you've been holding onto in your heart, they're not just random wishes. They are divine callings that are leading you to your purpose. You were not created to be afraid of the future. You were created to conquer it. You were designed to walk in confidence, to rise above your circumstances, and to fulfill your purpose. The God who knows the end from the beginning, who formed the stars and placed them in the sky, knows every detail of your life. There's nothing that surprises Him about your journey. There's no detour that He hasn't already accounted for. He's been preparing you for this moment, for the opportunities that lie ahead, and for the challenges that will shape you into the person you are destined to become. God's plan is already in motion, whether we see it clearly or not. From the moment you were conceived, before you were born, God had already mapped out your life. Every step you take, every choice you make, every opportunity that opens up before you, God has already been there, orchestrating it all. You may not always see the path He's leading you on, but rest assured, His hand is guiding you. When you think about the vastness of the universe, it's hard to believe that such an infinite creator could be so intimately involved in our personal journeys. Yet, in His wisdom and sovereignty, He has laid out a plan for each of us. Perfect, unique, and perfectly timed. Psalm 139:16 reminds us that your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. That means every step, every decision, every twist and turn in your life has already been seen by God. Even when life seems chaotic, even when things don't go as you expect, God is still working behind the scenes. He knows the end from the beginning, and His plan is unfolding just as it should. Think about a master architect. An architect begins with a blueprint long before construction starts. The foundation is laid before the walls are built, and the design is perfected before the structure goes up. In the same way, God is the master architect of your life. You may be in the middle of a season where you can't see the full picture. Maybe you feel stuck or uncertain. Maybe the plans you had for yourself aren't coming to fruition as you hoped. But just because you can't see the blueprint doesn't mean God isn't working. His design is in motion. It's already underway. In the Bible, we see this principle at work over and over. Take Joseph, for example. His life was filled with unexpected twists and turns. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. And yet through it all, God was working. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph later tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph could not see God's hand at work in the moment, but looking back, he realized that God had been orchestrating every event in his life for a greater purpose. The very struggles that seemed to derail his future were part of God's perfect plan all along. In our lives, we often find ourselves trying to make sense of the struggles and obstacles we face. We question why things happen the way they do. But here's the truth. Even when we don't understand the why, we can trust that God knows what's next. Just because you don't have all the answers right now doesn't mean God is not in control. In fact, He is preparing you for something greater. Maybe the challenge you're facing today is part of the foundation He's laying for tomorrow's success. Maybe the setback you're experiencing is a setup for something far beyond what you could ever dream. Take the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. They wandered for 40 years before entering the promised land. During that time, they faced hunger, thirst, and countless hardships. Yet in the midst of it all, God was preparing them. He was teaching them to trust Him, to rely on His provision, and to follow His guidance. The Israelites didn't know the full picture while they were in the wilderness, but God did. He knew where he was leading them. And when the time came, he brought them into the land he had promised them. It's easy to forget that God is working when we can't see the immediate results. In the fast-paced world we live in, we want everything now. We want the answers today. We want the success tomorrow. But God's timing is not ours. His ways are higher, and his understanding is beyond ours. Just because things don't seem to be happening right now doesn't mean that God's plan is on hold. Trust in his perfect timing. As you walk through life, ask yourself, are you willing to trust that God's plan is already in motion, even when you can't see it? Are you willing to let go of your need for control and trust that God is working behind the scenes for your good? He's not caught off guard by your circumstances. He's not surprised by your setbacks. His plan is already in motion, and you are exactly where you need to be. Take comfort in knowing that God has already gone ahead of you. He's already prepared the way. When you face challenges, remind yourself that God knows what's next. He's been there before you, and he will see you through to the end. His plan is unfolding step by step, and your purpose is being revealed in his time. Don't worry about what you can't control. Trust in the God who controls everything. His plan is already in motion, and it's leading you exactly where you need to go. Fear is the enemy of progress, and it is one of the greatest obstacles to fulfilling your purpose. The moment fear enters your heart, it begins to paralyze your potential, making it harder for you to move forward and take action. Fear convinces you that you are not enough, that your dreams are too big, or that you are unworthy of the success and fulfillment you desire. But the truth is, fear is a lie. It is a tool that the enemy uses to prevent you from stepping into the greatness God has already prepared for you. Consider the story of Moses. God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, a monumental task that seemed impossible. Moses had many fears: fear of rejection, fear of his own inadequacy, and fear of the unknown. When God gave him the assignment, Moses asked, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Exodus 3:11. Moses questioned his abilities, his worth, and his qualifications, but God responded, "I will be with you." Exodus 3:12. In that moment, Moses had a choice: to let his fear keep him in his comfort zone, or to trust that God had equipped him for the task. Fear tried to hold him back, but God's presence was the key that broke the chains of fear. Fear has a way of making us feel small, insignificant, and incapable of doing what God has called us to do. It makes us question whether we can really live up to the calling on our lives. But let me ask you this: how many times have you looked back on a fear you had in the past and realized it was unfounded? How many times has the thing you were afraid of turned out to be nothing more than a shadow, a figment of your imagination? Fear often magnifies the size of our problems and diminishes the power of God. It distorts reality and prevents us from seeing the truth that with God, nothing is impossible. In the Bible, we see time and time again how fear kept people from reaching their full potential. The 12 spies who went to scout the promised land were sent by God, yet when they saw the giants in the land, they were filled with fear and gave a report of defeat. 10 of the 12 spies said, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Numbers 13:33. Fear made them feel small and powerless, and as a result, they missed out on the blessing that God had for them. But Joshua and Caleb, who chose to trust in God's promise, were the only two who believed they could conquer the land despite the giants they faced. Fear kept the majority of the Israelites from stepping into their destiny, but Joshua and Caleb's faith enabled them to overcome it. Fear is not just a spiritual issue. It's a practical one as well. It often holds us back from taking the necessary steps to pursue our dreams, to speak up for what we believe, or to take risks that could lead to growth. Think about how fear affects your daily life. How many times have you hesitated to take that leap of faith, to make that difficult decision, or to follow through with a plan because fear told you it wasn't safe? Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough. These fears can cripple your ability to act. But what if, instead of letting fear control your actions, you allowed faith to lead the way? What if you took that step of courage, trusting that God would provide the strength and wisdom you need to succeed? When you face fear with faith, you begin to see obstacles as opportunities. You begin to recognize that fear is not a signal to stop, but a challenge to grow. Fear is an invitation to step into the unknown, knowing that God's promises will carry you through. In 2 Timothy 1:7, the Apostle Paul reminds us, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." Fear is not from God. It is a spirit that seeks to bind you and keep you from walking in the fullness of what He has called you to. God has given you power, love, and a sound mind to overcome any fear that stands in your way. This spirit within you is stronger than any fear the world can throw at you. With God on your side, you do not have to be afraid. Think about a time in your life when you chose to face your fears and step out in faith. Maybe it was the first time you tried something new, took a big risk, or moved outside your comfort zone. What happened? Chances are you didn't regret it. You may have faced challenges, but you grew stronger, wiser, and more resilient because of it. Fear tries to keep you from taking those steps, but when you push through, you discover that the rewards of courage far outweigh the cost of fear. Remember this: fear does not have to be your story. It does not have to define who you are or limit what you can achieve. Fear is simply a signal that you are on the verge of something great, something worth fighting for. When you recognize that fear is a tool of the enemy, you can stand firm and declare that you will not be moved by it. Your future is not defined by your fears. It is defined by your faith in God and the courage to walk in His calling for your life. So today, I encourage you to recognize the lies of fear for what they are and to replace them with the truth of God's word. Trust that God has already equipped you for everything He has called you to. Step out in faith and watch how God transforms your fears into victories. Don't let fear control your life. Let faith lead you to the future God has already prepared for you. You were created for greatness, and that greatness is already within you. Too often we limit ourselves by what we can see or by what others say about us. We look at our circumstances, our past mistakes, or the challenges in front of us, and we convince ourselves that we are not capable of achieving greatness. But the truth is, God designed you for a purpose, and that purpose is far greater than anything you can imagine. Think about the story of David. When God chose him to be king, he was just a young shepherd boy, overlooked by his family and dismissed by others. When Samuel went to anoint the next king of Israel, Jesse's father, Jesse, didn't even think to bring him in from the fields. It was only when God told Samuel to look beyond outward appearances that David was called to stand before the prophet. And yet, despite being the youngest and seemingly least qualified, David carried within him the greatness God had placed there. In 1 Samuel 16:7, God tells Samuel, "The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." David's greatness was not determined by his age or his circumstances. It was determined by God's call on his life. What about you? How often have you looked at your own life and thought, "I am not enough"? How often have you compared yourself to others and felt like you didn't measure up? The world may tell you that greatness is reserved for the talented, the wealthy, or the powerful, but God says that greatness is found in those who are willing to trust Him and walk in His purpose. It's not about what you have or don't have. It's about who you are in Christ and the potential He has placed within you. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Ephesians 2:10, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." You were created with a purpose, and that purpose is filled with greatness. You are not an accident, and your life is not a random collection of events. Every talent, every gift, every experience you've had is part of the divine design that God has for your life. And He has equipped you for greatness in ways that may not always be visible on the surface. The greatness within you is often hidden beneath the layers of self-doubt, fear, and comparison. But once you begin to see yourself as God sees you, that greatness will begin to rise to the surface. Consider a diamond. It starts as a rough, unpolished stone, and it takes time, pressure, and refining to bring out its brilliance. But the value of the diamond is there from the very beginning. In the same way, your greatness is already within you. But sometimes it takes challenges, trials, and personal growth to bring it to the surface. You may not see it in the moment, but God is shaping and molding you, using every experience to refine you into the person He created you to be. Greatness doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always come with a title or a platform or immediate recognition. Sometimes greatness is found in the quiet, faithful moments. Think about the story of Esther. She didn't seek out greatness or fame. She was just an ordinary girl living in extraordinary circumstances. But when the moment came, she was ready to step up and fulfill the purpose God had placed on her life. In Esther 4:14, Mordecai says to her, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Esther didn't know her true greatness until the right moment arrived, and when it did, she rose to the occasion, saving her people and fulfilling her destiny. What if you are where you are for such a time as this? What if the situation you find yourself in, the challenges you face, and the dreams you carry are all part of God's plan to bring out the greatness within you? It's easy to look at the obstacles and think that they are roadblocks to your success, but what if those obstacles are the very things God is using to prepare you for the greatness He has planned for your life? Your greatness is not determined by the opinions of others or by the standards the world sets for success. God defines your greatness. He sees the potential He has placed within you, and He is working in and through you to bring that greatness to fruition. But it requires you to walk by faith, to trust that He has equipped you, and to step boldly into the life He has called you to live. Ask yourself, am I living up to the greatness that God has already placed within me? It's not about what you've done in the past or what others think of you. It's about embracing the truth that God has a great plan for your future. Don't allow fear, insecurity, or past failures to rob you of the greatness you were created for. Instead, embrace the truth that you were made for something bigger, something greater, something that will make an impact in this world. You are not ordinary. You are extraordinary because the Creator of the universe has called you to live a life of greatness. Your purpose is greater than you can see right now. But as you continue to trust God, that greatness will unfold before you. Keep moving forward, keep trusting, and keep believing that God is leading you into the greatness He has already prepared for you. Greatness is already within you. It's time to step into it. The future is not unknown to God. He knows what lies ahead, even when we can't see it clearly. Often we struggle with uncertainty about the future, wondering what will happen tomorrow, what choices we should make, or whether we're on the right path. It's natural to feel uncertain at times, but we must remember that God, in His sovereignty, has already walked the path ahead of us. The future you worry about is already in His hands, and He has a plan far greater than you can imagine. Think about the story of Abraham. When God called Abraham to leave his homeland and go to a place that He would show him, Abraham didn't have a clear picture of where he was going. He didn't have a detailed map or a set itinerary. All he had was a promise from God. God didn't give him all the specifics, But he did give Abraham his presence and his word. In Genesis 12:1, God told Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Abraham didn't know exactly what the future held, but he trusted God's promise and took a step of faith. And through that step of faith, Abraham became the father of many nations. You see, God knows what's next. Even when you don't have all the answers, even when you can't see the road ahead, God is already there. He's not surprised by your circumstances or by the challenges you face. He is already in your tomorrow, preparing the way for you and guiding you through it. Just as he was with Abraham, God is with you, leading you step by step into the future he has prepared for you. It's easy to get caught up in the fear and anxiety of the unknown. But when we understand that God knows what's next for us, it changes everything. We don't have to fear the future because we serve a God who holds the future in his hands. Jeremiah 29:11 reminds us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." God has already designed your future, and it is filled with hope. His plans for you are not for harm, but for your good, no matter what it looks like in the moment. His plan is always working in your favor. Think about how a parent prepares for the future of their child. They make plans, set goals, and provide guidance, even when their child is too young to understand. The parent knows what the future holds for their child, even if the child doesn't. Similarly, God as our Heavenly Father knows the plans he has for us, even when we don't fully understand them. He's preparing us for what lies ahead, and sometimes the steps we take today are laying the foundation for the blessings and growth of tomorrow. In life, we often find ourselves asking, what's next? We question the decisions we need to make and wonder if we're headed in the right direction. But here's the truth. When we trust God, we don't have to have all the answers. We simply have to trust in his timing and his direction. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." We may not understand every twist and turn of the journey, but when we trust God and submit to his will, he will lead us exactly where we need to go. One of the challenges we face is the temptation to try and control the future. We want to know every detail, every outcome, and every step. But God's wisdom is greater than our own, and his plan often looks different from what we expect. Think of the Israelites as they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. They didn't know exactly how long they would be in the desert or when they would enter the promised land. They didn't always understand the why behind their circumstances, but God did. He knew exactly what they needed, when they needed it. In the wilderness, God was preparing them, teaching them to trust him and refining their character. Even though the Israelites couldn't see the full picture, God was leading them to a future filled with promise. We may feel like we're in a wilderness at times, uncertain of what's ahead, but God is always faithful. He knows what's next, and he is preparing us for what lies ahead. Whether we're facing uncertainty in our careers, relationships, or personal lives, we can take comfort in the fact that God has already gone ahead of us. He is not only with us in the present, but he is also in our future, working everything together for our good. There may be moments when the future seems unclear and we feel uncertain about the next steps. But in those moments, we can choose to trust that God knows exactly what's next for us. Instead of worrying about the unknown, we can rest in the peace that comes from knowing that God has already laid the path. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to trust that he will reveal them in his perfect time. So the next time you find yourself wondering about what's next, remember that God has already walked ahead of you. Trust that he knows the plans he has for you and that he is guiding you every step of the way. You are not alone in the unknown. God is with you, and he knows exactly what's next. The process of becoming who you were meant to be is often more about persistence than perfection. Too often we look at where we are and become discouraged because we haven't arrived at our destination yet. We get frustrated with ourselves for not being where we think we should be. But the reality is, growth is a journey, not a destination. And it requires consistency, patience, and an understanding that God is at work in us even when it feels like we're not making progress. Think about the life of Joseph. His journey to greatness didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took years of hardship, rejection, and waiting. From the time he was sold into slavery by his brothers to being falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph's life seemed anything but promising. Yet through it all, God was preparing him for a purpose that he couldn't see at the time. It wasn't until much later that Joseph could look back and understand that every trial, every setback had a purpose. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph understood that every painful step along the way was part of God's larger plan for his life. This is the truth for all of us. Growth requires us to go through processes. The road to greatness isn't always smooth, and the timing doesn't always align with our desires. But God uses the challenges and the waiting to mold us, shape us, and prepare us for what he has in store. It's easy to get discouraged when we're in the middle of the process, but we must remember that God is at work in us even when we don't see the results immediately. Think about the way a tree grows. It doesn't grow overnight, and it doesn't grow in a straight line. A tree's roots must first take hold in the soil before it can shoot up toward the sky. This process of rooting and growing may seem slow, but it is essential for the tree to be strong enough to withstand the winds and storms that will come. In the same way, God allows us to go through seasons of preparation where we may not see immediate fruit, but he is strengthening us, building our character, and preparing us for the challenges ahead. We live in a world that values instant results. We want success now, we want answers now, and we want to see the fruit of our labor immediately. But God's timing is often different from ours. He is not concerned with instant results. He is concerned with our development. He understands that lasting success comes through process, through the refining fire, through perseverance. It's easy to want to skip the hard parts, but without those hard parts, we wouldn't be able to handle the blessings that God has in store for us. James 1:2-4 speaks to this, saying, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Trials and challenges are not meant to break us, but to refine us. The trials we face produce perseverance, and perseverance leads to maturity. This is a process that can't be rushed, but it is necessary for us to become who God has called us to be. In our world today, we often measure success by the end result, the house, the job, the accomplishments. But God measures success by our faithfulness and our character. The process isn't just about achieving a goal. It's about who we become along the way. Are we developing patience, humility, trust, and faith in God? Are we becoming more like Christ with each challenge we face? God cares more about these things than about whether or not we have arrived at our destination. Consider the way a craftsman shapes a piece of wood. The wood starts as a rough, imperfect piece. But the craftsman doesn't rush the process. He carefully chisels away at the wood, knowing that with each stroke he is bringing out the beauty and purpose that lies within it. In the same way, God is the master craftsman of our lives, and he is shaping us through the challenges and the waiting. Each challenge is a tool in his hand, refining us and making us more like the person he created us to be. What if, instead of focusing on the destination, we embraced the process? What if we stopped getting discouraged by how far we have to go and started appreciating the lessons and growths we experience along the way? The process might not be easy, but it is necessary. The Bible tells us that in the end, we will be stronger, more complete, and more equipped for the calling on our lives. The work God is doing in us now is preparing us for what He has ahead. It's also important to remember that we are not alone in the process. God is with us every step of the way, and He has promised that He will never leave us nor forsake us. Hebrews 13:05. Even when the process is difficult, we can find comfort in knowing that God is working in us and through us, and that He is faithful to bring us to the place He has prepared for us. So today, if you're in the midst of the process and feeling discouraged, remember that God is at work. Embrace the journey, knowing that every step, every challenge, every delay is part of His plan to shape you into the person He has called you to be. Don't despise the process. Trust that it is preparing you for something far greater than you can see right now. God knows what He's doing, and He will bring you to completion in His perfect time. We all have dreams, desires, and visions of what our lives could be. These dreams are often birthed deep within us, placed there by God Himself. However, one of the greatest challenges we face in pursuing these dreams is overcoming the doubt and fear that tell us we aren't worthy or capable of achieving them. We question whether we have the ability, the resources, or the right circumstances to see our dreams come to fruition. But the reality is, if God has given you a vision, He has already equipped you with everything you need to fulfill it. The key is to recognize that your worth and your potential are not defined by your circumstances or abilities, but by God's calling on your life. Look at the story of Moses. When God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he was filled with doubt and fear. In Exodus 3:11, Moses asks God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Moses couldn't understand how someone like him, who'd been living in exile for years and felt inadequate, could accomplish such a monumental task. But God didn't respond by addressing Moses' doubt directly. Instead, He reminded Moses that the task wasn't about his own ability. It was about God's power. God said to Moses, "I will be with you." Exodus 3:12. It wasn't about Moses being enough. It was about God being enough. Moses' story reminds us that when God calls us to something, He doesn't call us based on what we can do on our own. He calls us because He knows what He has already equipped us with, and because He is with us every step of the way. Moses eventually overcame his fear and doubt, but it took him realizing that it wasn't his own strength or abilities that would make him successful. It was God's presence and power working through him. Think about the challenges you face today. What dreams has God placed in your heart? Are you allowing fear to hold you back from pursuing them? We often think that we need to be perfect, have everything in place, or wait for the right circumstances before we step out and pursue our goals. But if we look at Scripture, we see that God often calls those who seem the least likely to succeed, those who feel unqualified or incapable. Think of David, the young shepherd boy who became king. Think of Gideon, who saw himself as the weakest in his family, yet God used him to lead Israel to victory. God's calling on our lives isn't based on our qualifications or experience. It's based on His divine plan and purpose for us. Consider the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. In this parable, the master gives 3 servants different amounts of money, talents, to manage while he is away. The first servant, who receives 5 talents, invests and doubles the money. The second servant, with 2 talents, does the same. But the third servant, who is given just 1 talent, buries it out of fear. When the master returns, he rewards the first 2 servants for being faithful with what they were given, but he rebukes the third servant for his fear and inaction. The master says in Matthew 25:26, "You wicked, lazy servant." The third servant's fear kept him from doing anything with the talent he was given. And as a result, he missed out on the opportunity to fulfill his potential. The lesson here is that God has given each of us talents, dreams, and visions. But it is up to us to step out in faith and use what he has given us. Fear may try to keep us in a place of safety, but staying there leads to missed opportunities. God's plan for your life is far bigger than your comfort zone, and he is calling you to step out in faith, trusting that he will provide what you need along the way. It's natural to feel afraid or uncertain, but we must remember that God does not give us a spirit of fear. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." Fear is not from God. It's a tool that the enemy uses to keep us from moving forward into our calling. When we choose to walk by faith and trust in God's provision, we can overcome that fear and move forward into the future he has planned for us. In addition, it's important to recognize that God often works through our weaknesses. The Apostle Paul reminds us in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'" Sometimes, the very things we perceive as weaknesses or limitations are the areas where God's power can shine the brightest. We don't have to be perfect or have it all together. We just need to be willing to step out, trusting that God will equip us for the task he has called us to. So, what is holding you back from pursuing the dreams God has placed in your heart? Is it fear of failure? Fear of what others will think? Fear of the unknown? God is calling you to trust in him and to step out in faith. He has already given you everything you need to fulfill your purpose. Don't allow fear or doubt to keep you from stepping into the future he has for you. When you trust him and move forward in faith, you will see how he equips you for everything you need along the way. You are not called to live in fear. You are called to step boldly into the plans God has for your life. Trust that he will guide you, provide for you, and equip you every step of the way. Your dreams are not too big for God. The question is, will you trust him enough to pursue them? As we come to the end of this journey, I want to leave you with one final thought. You don't have to fear because God knows exactly what's next for you. Your future, your purpose, and your destiny are secure in his hands. Even when the road seems unclear, remember that he has already walked ahead of you, guiding every step. Trust in his timing, embrace the process of growth, and step forward in faith, knowing that his plans for you are good. No matter where you are in life, whether you're in a season of waiting, a season of growth, or a season of challenge, God is with you. He has equipped you with everything you need to fulfill the calling on your life. Don't allow fear, doubt, or the challenges you face to hold you back from pursuing what he has placed in your heart. Your dreams, your purpose, they are not too big for God. I encourage you to keep moving forward with boldness and confidence, knowing that you are not alone in this journey. With God by your side, there is nothing impossible. Believe in his promise and trust that he is faithful to bring you into the future he has prepared for you. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I pray that this message will stay with you and inspire you to step into the fullness of what God has for you. May he bless you, guide you, and empower you to walk in the path he has set before you. Good luck as you continue your journey, and always remember, God knows what's next for you. Thank you.